Business trips weren't usually a big deal. You fly in, you check into your hotel, you sit through endless presentations, fake smile through small talk, and count down the hours until you're back in your own bed. That's how I thought this one would go too, until I saw who they'd paired me with. Ryan Becker. I hadn't even known he'd be on the trip. Different department, different city, different everything. The guy who once sent a company-wide email with a spreadsheet so clean it made our COO cry. I'd seen him maybe 3 times in person before this. Always well-dressed, always composed. The kind of guy you assumed had a closet full of perfectly steamed shirts and never spilled coffee on anything. I, on the other hand, had a half-button collar, coffee stains on my resume, and a perpetual case of imposter syndrome. So yeah, finding out I'd be rooming with him for 3 nights at a mid-tier hotel in Dallas? That was a curveball. "Oh," I said when I walked into the room and saw him already unpacking. "You're here." Ryan turned from the dresser with a polite smile. "Hey, you must be Jordan." I nodded, stepping inside, dragging my suitcase across the slightly sticky carpet. "Guess we're roommates?" "Company's idea, not mine," he said quickly, like he needed to clarify. I had a solo room booked, but they overbooked the block. Logistics or something. "No worries," I replied, trying not to sound as awkward as I felt. "As long as you don't snore." He chuckled. Same. We settled in with minimal small talk. He claimed the bed by the window. I took the one closer to the door. The hotel wasn't fancy, but it had the basics. 2 queen beds, a dresser, a too loud AC unit, and a sad-looking minibar with 3 overpriced sodas and an expired Snickers. The first day went smoothly. We spent most of it in conference rooms with bad lighting and lukewarm coffee, pretending to care about quarterly forecasts and synergy strategies. Ryan was on his game. He always was. And I mostly stayed quiet, taking notes and counting ceiling tiles. Back in the room that night, we were both wiped. He kicked off his shoes, unbuttoned his dress shirt like he'd done it 1,000 times in a mirror, and flopped onto his bed in a fitted white tee and dark slacks. I tried not to stare. "You eat yet?" he asked, glancing at me. "Not really," I said, setting my laptop on the desk. Figured I'd just order something. "Mind if I tag along?" And that's how we ended up sitting on the floor between the 2 beds, sharing takeout Chinese from a place with a name I couldn't pronounce. He talked more than I expected about New York winters, his last vacation, how much he hated Zoom, and I started to notice things. The way he used chopsticks like a pro. The way he rolled his sleeves. The way he listened, like he actually gave a damn. Then, just as I was thinking how weirdly nice the whole night was, the power went out. It was fast. 1 second we were sitting in soft lamplight, and the next, the room was pitch black. The air conditioning sputtered and died, the overhead hum gone. Then nothing. Just silence. "Shit," Ryan muttered. I grabbed my phone and flicked the flashlight on. "You think it's just a room?" He crossed to the window, peeking through the curtain. "Street's dark, too. Looks like a full blackout." "No way," I said, joining him. Sure enough, the whole block was out. Car alarms were going off down the road, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. "Well," he said, backing away from the window, "this just got interesting." The room was already starting to heat up without the AC. I sat back down on the bed, trying to act unbothered, but my brain wouldn't shut up. There was something about the way his silhouette moved in the low light, the casual strength of it, the familiarity forming in such a short span. We barely knew each other, but the quiet between us wasn't awkward anymore. "You good with this?" he asked after a few minutes, sitting down across from me again. His voice was low, a little different in the dark. "Yeah," I said, probably too quickly. "Just wasn't expecting to share a blackout with a coworker." Ryan smirked. "Could be worse." "Yeah?" "Yeah," he said, leaning back on his palms, his legs stretched out toward me. "Could be stuck in the elevator with Sheila from HR." I laughed. "Okay, fair." For a while we just sat there, our only light coming from the soft glow of our phones. He asked if I wanted to play a game, anything to pass the time. I said, sure. He suggested 2 truths and a lie. Classic. Easy. He went first. I once got kicked out of a museum in Rome, he said, eyes on mine. I can play the piano, and I've never had a one-night stand. I narrowed my eyes. Museum one's true. You give off piano energy. He raised an eyebrow. Piano energy? Yeah, like controlled elegance. He laughed, shaking his head. Okay, but what's your guess? You've totally had a one-night stand. He paused, then nodded. Fair. That was the lie. Something in the air shifted. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it. A spark, or a stretch, or something between us. Maybe it was the dark. Maybe it was the quiet. Or maybe it was just the way he was looking at me now. Your turn, he said, and suddenly, I wasn't so sure I could play it safe. I hesitated. It was just a stupid game, right? 2 truths and a lie. Nothing serious. But the way Ryan was looking at me, not smug or teasing, just steady, made it feel different. Okay, I said, trying to sound casual. Here goes. He leaned in slightly, elbows resting on his knees. 1, I've never broken a bone. 2, I once made out with someone at an office party. 3, I'm terrified of flying. His eyes narrowed. All very plausible. I shrugged. That's the point. I'm guessing the fear of flying is the lie. I shook my head. Nope. That one's real. White-knuckle takeoffs. Sweaty palms. The whole deal. He raised his brows. So the office party makeout? That was the lie. Damn, he said, smiling. You had me. I gave a small nod, but I could feel my face getting warm. Why did I include that? Why not just say something safer, something bland? Ryan leaned back, stretching out on the bed behind him, hands folded behind his head. You ever wanted to, though? I glanced over. Wanted to what? Make out with someone at a party. At work, I mean. It was one of those questions that could be nothing or everything. I searched his face for any sign of sarcasm, but all I saw was curiosity. Maybe, I said carefully. He didn't say anything right away. Just let the silence stretch a little longer, like he wanted to see what I'd do with it. The faint glow from my phone cast light across his jawline, the sharp angle of his cheekbone. He looked too good like that, stretched out and relaxed in the half-dark, like this wasn't weird at all. You? I asked finally. He smirked. Maybe. I swallowed, the words sitting heavy between us. The temperature in the room was climbing now, the stale hotel air thick without circulation. I kicked off the covers and stood, stretching a little too dramatically to cover my nerves. Too hot to sleep, I muttered. Tell me about it, he said, sitting up. He pulled his tee off over his head and tossed it toward his suitcase like it meant nothing. But I saw the way he caught my glance. Quick, flickering, like he was clocking my reaction. He was built, but not in a gym bro way, more like someone who stayed active because he needed to. Defined chest, faint trail of hair leading below the waistband of his sweats. I looked away too fast. I can crack the window, I said, crossing the room. Sure, he said, voice a little lower. The window barely opened, but the bit of night air that trickled in felt better than nothing. I stayed there, facing the glass, trying to steady my breath, trying not to read too much into anything. But then I heard the creak of the bed behind me, the soft thud of feet hitting carpet, and a second later he was standing a few feet away, just behind me. You all right? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, just thinking. About what? I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. The pause between us was heavy now, thicker than the heat. I could feel him behind me. Not touching, but close. Close enough. You ever do that thing where you feel like something's about to happen? I said quietly, still staring out at the dark city beyond the window. He was silent for a moment. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I do. When I turned to look at him, he was closer than I expected. His eyes searched mine just for a second, like he was checking for something. Permission, fear, hope. Then the lights flickered. Just for a moment. A brief sputter of fluorescent light from the overhead fixture, like the power was trying to come back. But it didn't. And in that split-second flash, I realized how close we'd gotten. How easily the space between us had shrunk. When darkness swallowed the room again, we were still standing there. Breathing. Waiting. "You want to sit?" he asked, nodding toward the bed. I nodded, throat dry. We both sat, not touching, but side by side now. The hum of the outside world was gone, muffled by the blackout. It was just the two of us, and the occasional car honk in the distance. He spoke first. "You know," he said, voice softer now, "I've done a lot of these trips. Shared rooms before. Nothing like this." "Like what?" I asked, even though I knew what he meant. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Like this energy. This thing." I swallowed hard. I thought it was just me. It's not. That hung in the air, heavier than anything else we'd said. "I don't know if this is a bad idea," I admitted, my voice a little unsteady. "I mean, we work together." "Different departments," he said gently. "Different cities. This isn't going to come back to the office with us." I nodded, heart pounding. I could feel the heat of his leg near mine. The tension was almost unbearable. And then, just barely above a whisper, he said, "You can tell me to stop, but I don't want to pretend like I haven't been thinking about this since you walked into the room." I turned to look at him, really look, and what I saw wasn't the polished version of Ryan from meetings or emails. It was someone real, nervous maybe, open. "Okay," I said quietly, "then don't pretend." The air between us was so still I swear I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the hotel walls. Even in the dark, I could feel him watching me. Close, steady, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. He moved slowly, like he didn't want to spook me, like he was still giving me a chance to change my mind. His hand brushed against my knee, just a light touch, the kind that makes your skin buzz for minutes afterward. "You sure?" he asked, voice barely above a murmur. I nodded. "Yeah." And that was all it took. His lips met mine in a soft, tentative kiss. Nothing rushed, nothing aggressive. It wasn't what I expected from a guy like him. Ryan always seemed so confident, almost cocky in a boardroom. But here, in this blackout silence, he was careful, gentle. I kissed him back, maybe a little too eagerly. But once that first layer of tension cracked, it all came rushing out. We were both leaning in now, hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. His hands were warm on my sides, fingertips brushing over the fabric of my shirt like he was memorizing the way I felt. I ran mine over his bare shoulders, down the curve of his back, feeling the taut muscles beneath skin still warm from the heat of the room. He pulled away just enough to whisper, "This okay?" "Yeah," I said again, my voice sounding rough in my own ears. Yeah." There was a pause, but it wasn't awkward. It was full. Charged. I felt his forehead rest against mine. We stayed like that for a moment. Just breathing. I don't know why that made it feel more real than anything else. "I wasn't planning this," he said quietly. "Me neither. I didn't think you." "You were wrong," I said, cutting him off with a half smile he couldn't see, but maybe felt. And then we were kissing again. Deeper this time, less hesitant. The kind of kiss that made the room feel even darker. Like time had thinned out and there was only this. Mouths and breath and hands exploring carefully, curiously, like we both knew we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be, and didn't care. When he guided me gently backward onto the bed, I didn't resist. The blankets were still twisted at the foot from earlier, but we barely noticed. He leaned over me, his weight settling beside mine, never fully on top. One of his legs slipped between mine. I could feel the heat radiating off him, his chest just hovering above mine, our lips still brushing between half-spoken thoughts. "You're really something," he said, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. I laughed softly. "So are you." He smiled into the next kiss, and that little moment, right there, hit harder than anything. This wasn't just lust. There was something else here. A kind of slow, tentative connection we were both trying to name with touch, because the words weren't ready yet. It didn't go any further than that, not really. Just kisses, closeness, the feeling of him curled up beside me in the dark, both of us quiet and breathless, and figuring out how the hell we'd gone from work acquaintances to this. At some point, hours later, he fell asleep with his arm draped over my chest. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, trying to process everything. It wasn't just the kisses. It was how easy it had felt. Like something we'd both been circling for longer than we'd admitted. Something neither of us had the guts to say out loud until the city plunged into darkness and the silence made us honest. I didn't know what would happen when the power came back on, but I knew this. I didn't want to go back to pretending we were just coworkers anymore. I woke up to sunlight creeping through the curtains. The power was still out. No hum from the AC, no blinking light from the microwave across the room. Just the quiet hum of early morning traffic outside, and the even quieter rhythm of Ryan's breathing next to me. At some point during the night, he'd shifted closer. His head was nestled near my shoulder, one leg thrown lightly over mine, like he'd done it without thinking. I didn't move, didn't want to risk breaking whatever fragile thing we'd stumbled into overnight. The scent of his skin, clean, faintly citrusy, lingered in the space between us. His breath warmed the side of my neck, and even though I hadn't gotten much sleep, I felt more grounded than I had in months. It took him a while to stir. When he did, it was gradual, a soft inhale, a twitch of his fingers against my side, then a groggy whisper, "Shit, morning already?" "Barely," I said, voice rough from sleep. He lifted his head, blinking at me through messy hair and half-closed eyes. "We're still alive?" "Looks like it." He didn't move right away, just stayed there, head propped up on his arm, looking at me with something between amusement and uncertainty. And I realized, in that quiet pause, this was the first morning after moment I'd had with someone where I didn't want to run. I didn't want to rewind it or pretend it hadn't happened. Ryan exhaled. "Okay, so that happened." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, it did. You okay?" "I am," I said honestly. "Are you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. Just didn't think my Q4 presentation trip would turn into a low-key emotional unraveling in the dark with a coworker." I laughed. "Yeah, that wasn't in the itinerary." He smiled, but I could see the gears turning in his head. He was thinking about the same things I was. What does this mean? What happens after the trip? Is this just hotel room intimacy or something more? Before either of us could say anything else, there was a sharp knock at the door. Ryan flinched, pulling back instinctively. I sat up, rubbing the back of my neck as the knock came again, followed by a voice. "Housekeeping!" We both exhaled, relief and tension, and 1,000 unspoken things tangled in our chests. I got up and cracked the door open, told them we were fine, then closed it again gently. When I turned around, Ryan was sitting at the edge of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should shower," he said. "Go for it," I replied. He grabbed a change of clothes and disappeared into the bathroom. The moment he closed the door, the room felt heavier, like all the weight of what we hadn't said had settled into the quiet. When he came out, dressed in a crisp button-down and jeans, hair still damp, he looked different. Not less himself, just more guarded, like he was stepping back into his usual armor. I stayed seated, unsure what to say. Ryan grabbed his phone, checked it, then looked at me. Still no power. They sent a company-wide text saying the first 2 sessions are postponed. I nodded. "Guess we've got time." He hesitated, then walked over to his side of the room and sat on the bed, facing me. "Jordan," he said slowly. I'm not trying to mess with you. I know, I said. This wasn't just some heat-of-the-moment thing for me. I swallowed. Me neither. He let out a breath and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've had crushes on coworkers before, I'm not gonna lie. But this, I don't know, man. Last night felt different. Like, you see someone in meetings for months, and then suddenly you're sitting in the dark and they're right there, and it's like, oh, there you are. I looked at him, really looked, and saw it in his face. The vulnerability, the uncertainty, the way he wasn't sure what came next, but was still willing to say something anyway. I've had that same thought, I said. Except, I never thought I'd be your type. He raised an eyebrow. Who says you're not? Just a hunch? Well, he said, your hunch is wrong. The silence after that was soft, warm. I stood, stepped closer, and sat next to him. We didn't touch. Just sat side by side, our knees almost brushing. A quiet calm settled between us. I don't know what this is yet, he said, but I'd like to find out. Me too. He smiled again, and it wasn't the polished one I'd seen in meetings. It was quieter. Real. Then, as if it had been waiting for us to get everything out, the lights flickered back on. The AC roared to life, the room filled with the faint buzz of electricity. We both looked up, blinking. Power's back, I said. Yeah, Ryan said, turning toward me with that same smile. But I don't want to go back to how things were. The rest of the morning passed in a kind of daze. The hotel slowly came back to life, lights humming, hallway conversations drifting past our door, the faint beep of elevators starting up again. But inside the room, it was like we were still holding our breath. After the lights came back on, neither of us moved right away. Ryan stayed seated beside me, his hands clasped between his knees. I watched the way his fingers fidgeted, how his leg bounced the slightest bit, like his body hadn't quite caught up to what had just happened between us. We should probably get ready, I said eventually, trying to break the spell without breaking us. He nodded, but didn't look away from me. You good? Yeah, I said. Are you? He exhaled. Getting there. We went about the rest of the morning like we were back on script, buttoning up collared shirts, fixing hair in the mirror, pulling lanyards over our heads. But there was something new layered underneath everything. It wasn't just attraction. It was awareness. When we moved around each other in the room, our shoulders brushed. When we looked up at the same time, our eyes held just a second longer than they needed to. And when we finally stepped out into the hallway and headed toward the conference ballroom, I felt it again. The shift, the quiet thread tying us together. The day dragged. Half the hotel was still running off backup generators, and the mood was off. Presenters fumbled through talks with technical glitches, and attendees whispered about how the schedule was a mess. But the only thing I could think about was Ryan. He was sitting 3 seats down during the first workshop. I should have been listening to the speaker drone on about fiscal policy, but all I could focus on was the memory of his hand on my leg the night before. The way his breath had hitched when I kissed him. The way his voice had gone soft in the dark when he said, I don't want to go back to how things were. After lunch, we finally crossed paths again by the coffee station. He handed me a paper cup without a word, and I took it like it was the most normal thing in the world. You okay? He asked under his breath, voice low so no one around could hear. I'm fine, I said. You? He gave a tight smile. I've been thinking about last night all day. Same. He paused, checking to make sure no one was paying attention, then added, Can we talk after the last session? Like, actually talk. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. We didn't see much of each other after that. I went to a breakout group. He joined a sales networking roundtable. We texted once. Just a quick still on for later from him and a thumbs up from me, but the tension had shifted. No longer wondering if something was happening. Now it was about what comes next. By the time we got back to the room that evening, I was exhausted. My shirt was untucked, my badge lanyard stuffed in my pocket, and my brain was fried from pretending to network. Ryan came in a few minutes after me, loosening his tie and dropping into the chair by the window. We didn't talk right away. He stared out the window for a while, then finally said, "I'm not good at this stuff. Feelings, or whatever this is." I nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to be good at it, just honest." "I haven't really done this before," he admitted. "Dated, sure, but not with a guy." My chest tightened. "Okay. I mean, I've thought about it, but it's never gotten past that. Never felt like I could be that guy." I stayed quiet, let him talk. "But last night," he paused, "it didn't feel like a thing I was trying to be. It just felt like you. You were there, and it made sense." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It made sense to me too." He looked over, finally meeting my eyes. "I don't want to make this messy or complicated. I know we don't live in the same city. I know we work for the same company. But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." "You don't have to." He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "So, what does this look like when we fly back?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'd like to find out." That seemed to be the right answer. He stood and crossed the room slowly, standing in front of me. I looked up, and for a second, I saw that same look from the night before, the quiet vulnerability under all his confidence. Like he was still figuring it out, but he wanted to do it with me. He leaned down and kissed me again. No blackout, no storm, just us. That second kiss was different. There was no darkness to hide in, no excuse of power outages or weird hotel tension to blur the moment. It was just daylight filtering through the curtains and the two of us, sober, fully aware, not pretending we didn't know what we were doing. His hands were on my waist this time, firmer, more certain. Mine gripped the back of his neck, feeling the warmth of his skin under my fingertips. We didn't rush it. We didn't need to. There was something quieter, deeper now, like we were both trying to memorize what this felt like with no pressure to label it yet. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "So," he whispered, "what now?" "We eat," I said with a half smile. "I'm starving." Ryan laughed, low and warm. "Same. I think there's a Thai place 2 blocks over." We got changed into t-shirts and jeans, both of us ditching our business clothes like we were shedding the conference versions of ourselves. I caught him looking at me once while I tied my shoes. Just a glance, soft and unreadable. Outside, the city was back to normal. No signs of last night's blackout, except for a few blinking stoplights. But we weren't the same. Not really. We walked side by side, our shoulders brushing now and then. I didn't know if anyone could tell something had shifted between us, but I didn't care if they did. At the restaurant, we took a booth near the window. He ordered pad see ew. I got green curry, and the conversation just flowed. We talked about college, how he'd almost dropped out before switching majors, about my move to my current city, how lonely it had been at first. Every now and then, he'd ask something small but personal, like he was slowly peeling back layers. I let him. After lunch, we walked through a nearby park. He didn't touch me, not in public, but our steps were synced. Our silences were comfortable. "You think we'll still talk after this trip?" he asked suddenly. "Yeah," I said, meaning it. "You think we'll, I don't know, see each other?" "Depends." "On what?" I smiled. "On whether you're willing to visit someone who's obsessed with spreadsheets and orders the same boring breakfast every day." He gave me a look. I'd visit someone who kissed me like that again. That shut me up, and probably turned me a little red. Back at the hotel, we skipped the next conference mixer, claimed we weren't feeling great. Not a lie, I wasn't in the mood for handshakes and lukewarm cocktails. I wanted him. We ended up back in our room, door locked, the TV playing quietly in the background, but neither of us watching. Ryan lay back on his bed, arms behind his head, eyes on the ceiling. I sat cross-legged on mine, sipping from a water bottle and trying to slow the rhythm of my thoughts. "You ever had something start like this before?" he asked. "No." He turned his head to face me. "Me neither." It wasn't a grand declaration. It was just 2 people admitting they'd crossed a line they hadn't expected to. But it wasn't regret. Not even close. Later, we lay on the same bed. Not for chillin', not even to make out again. Just to be close. The heat of his arm next to mine was enough. We listened to the low hum of the TV and the occasional buzz of our phones. The night outside the window glowed faintly with city light. "I keep thinking about last night," he said, voice low. "Yeah?" "About how easy it felt. Like we'd been circling each other without realizing." I turned toward him. "Maybe we had." He shifted closer, our knees touching under the blanket. "What happens when we leave?" "I guess we find out." He nodded, then laced his fingers with mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. No hesitation this time. The last day of the summit arrived faster than I expected. There was this strange mix of exhaustion and something like anticipation in the air, not just from the trip winding down, but from everything that had happened in the 3 short days we'd shared that room. The blackout had become the least dramatic thing between us. We went to our final sessions, shook hands with people we barely knew, and made polite conversation over continental breakfast. But under the surface, the energy between me and Ryan hadn't dulled. It had just grown quieter, steadier. I'd catch him glancing at me across the room when no one was looking. And once, walking out of a breakout session, he let his fingers brush against mine as we passed through a tight hallway. No one saw. But I felt it for hours. When we finally made it back to our room after everything wrapped, our flight wasn't for another 6 hours. We both sat on our beds, bags mostly packed, the silence between us different now. Less nervous, more like we were holding on to the moment before real life came back in full force. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," he said almost abruptly. I looked up from where I'd been checking my boarding pass. "It doesn't have to be. You say that like it's simple." "It is," I said. "If we make it that way." Ryan exhaled, standing up and pacing a little. "I'm just trying to be real here. I don't want to mess this up. You know?" "You haven't," I said, standing too. "Look, whatever this is, it doesn't have to be anything yet. We just keep talking. See each other. Let it grow or not. We don't need answers today." He studied me, his eyes soft but serious. "You're better at this than I am," I smiled. "Not really. I just know I don't want to forget what it felt like to wake up next to you this morning." That stopped him cold. He stepped closer until we were standing face to face. "I don't either," he said. Then, after a beat, "Would it be totally insane if I asked to fly out next weekend?" "Not insane," I said. "Just bold. I've been bold exactly once this week. Turned out all right." He reached for my hand again, lacing his fingers with mine like we'd done it 1,000 times. It felt normal. Right. And just like that, the trip started winding down. We checked out of the room, took a cab to the airport together, sat shoulder to shoulder at the gate, watching muted cable news and ignoring the people around us. We were flying to different cities, but for those final hours, we were still in our bubble. Right before boarding, he turned to me. "I'm serious about visiting. I'm serious about wanting you to." We didn't kiss at the gate. It didn't feel like the moment for that. But when he reached out and touched my arm before stepping onto his plane, it felt like a promise. On my flight home, I stared out the window, the city lights fading below us. Everything felt still, but I wasn't going back to the same routine. Not really, because for the first time in a long time, I was thinking about something more than work, more than the daily grind. I was thinking about Ryan. 2 weeks after the trip, Ryan showed up at my apartment with an overnight bag and that same nervous smile he'd had in the hotel room just before he kissed me. He looked around like he wasn't sure what to expect, but when I stepped forward and hugged him, really hugged him, no second guessing, it was like the tension drained right out of his shoulders. "You smell like airport," I teased as he dropped his bag by the door. "You smell like laundry detergent and way too much calm," he shot back, grinning. We spent the first few hours just existing. He sat on the couch while I made coffee. I watched him flip through one of the books on my shelf, his legs stretched out like he'd already made himself at home. It wasn't a date, it wasn't a business trip. It was just us, figuring this out one quiet step at a time. That night, we ordered in again, Thai, like at the hotel, and ended up watching a movie we barely paid attention to. He sat closer this time. No pretense, no shared beds forced by hotel logistics. Just a couch, and 2 people who didn't want to pretend anymore. At some point, his hand slid over mine and stayed there. I kept replaying that night, he said softly, eyes fixed on the screen. Not just the kissing, the stillness, the way it felt. Yeah, I said. Me too. We didn't sleep much that night, not because we were fooling around nonstop, though there was definitely some of that, but because we talked. The kind of quiet, half-whispered talks that only happen when the lights are off and your guard is down. He told me things he hadn't said on the trip. About the guy he liked in college but never said anything to. About how his family would probably pretend not to notice if he brought a guy home, and how weirdly that made him feel. I told him about my first real heartbreak, how I had sworn off dating for a while because it felt like people only wanted parts of me, never the whole thing. I don't want parts of you, he said. I want the whole. That should have sounded like a line, but it didn't. Not with him. The next morning we made breakfast together. We spilled coffee, burned toast, laughed like idiots. It was messy and domestic, and I didn't want it to end. When he left that afternoon, he kissed me at the door. Not a dramatic goodbye kiss, not the kind you see in movies. Just simple. Honest. I'll text you when I land, he said. Cool, I replied, casually as I could manage. But when I closed the door and leaned back against it, my chest was doing backflips. We saw each other 3 more times that month. Once in my city, once in his. Once in between, where we met in this random middle-of-nowhere town for a weekend just to see if it still felt real. It did. It kept feeling real. And not long after that, he asked if I'd ever consider transferring to his office. New team. New city. A new version of this thing we were building, but on firmer ground. I don't want to be a secret, he said. I don't want us to be some story I tell a few years from now that ends with, but we were just roommates on a trip. Yeah, I said, I don't either. So I transferred. I didn't do it just for him. I did it because the job made sense. Because the move made sense. But mostly, yeah, it was because of him. And now, we live together. Same apartment. Same bed. No twin beds with that awkward space in between. No hotel blackout to nudge us into each other. We still joke about it sometimes, how the power going out changed everything, but the truth is, I think it just let us see what had been there all along.